My family disowned me for marrying a black man. They stood in my parents' living room 10 years ago and told me, with frightening certainty, that he was not one of us. Then they slammed the door behind me and erased my name from their lives. Now, a decade later, I watch those same people step out of 3 dusty cars and stare up at the $44 million mansion they never imagined I'd own. The security cameras captured everything. The hesitation in their movements, the desperation in their faces, the way my mother's hands trembled as she pressed the intercom button. Rain tapped softly against the glass beside me. I could still hear my father's voice from 10 years earlier, cold and sharp enough to cut through bone. You made your choice. Back then, I left with 2 suitcases and a broken heart. Today, they had come begging, and they had no idea my husband was about to answer the door. My name is Elena, and for most of my life, I existed as the disappointment my family never stopped comparing to everyone else. I grew up in a house where approval was treated like a prize that could be taken away at any moment. My older brother earned it effortlessly. My cousins earned it by following expectations. I lost it whenever I questioned them. They never called me incapable. They called me stubborn, unrealistic, difficult, the kind of labels that sound harmless until you hear them for 20 years. When I met Marcus, he was the first person who listened without trying to correct me. He didn't speak over me, dismiss my ideas, or measure my worth against someone else's success. He simply treated me like my voice mattered. My family hated that immediately. At first, they disguised their prejudice as concern. They questioned his intentions, his background, his future. But beneath every conversation was the same ugly message. They believed he would never belong. What they failed to understand was that Marcus possessed something none of them had ever shown me: unshakable faith. While they focused on what he looked like, I paid attention to how he worked. While they predicted our failure, he quietly built opportunities. And while they spent years underestimating both of us, Marcus and I learned something valuable. People reveal themselves most clearly when they think they're superior. The insults rarely arrived as open attacks. That was what made them so effective. At family gatherings, conversations would pause for half a second whenever Marcus entered the room. It was a tiny delay, barely noticeable to anyone else, but impossible to miss when you were living it. My aunt would greet everyone warmly before offering Marcus a tight smile that never reached her eyes. My father spoke to him with exaggerated politeness, the kind people use when they've already decided they don't respect you. Whenever Marcus discussed his business ideas, relatives exchanged quick glances across the table. Sometimes a cousin would lower his eyes to hide a smirk. Other times, someone would change the subject before Marcus could finish speaking. The message was always the same. They didn't think he belonged in their world. One Thanksgiving, my brother raised his glass and congratulated every couple in the room except us. The silence that followed lasted only seconds, but it felt much longer. Marcus simply smiled and continued eating. That calm confidence seemed to irritate them even more. The less he reacted, the harder they searched for ways to provoke him. I noticed everything. The whispered conversations that stopped when we approached. The invitations that somehow never reached us. The careful wording designed to sound harmless while leaving a bruise behind. And with every passing month, I began to realize those small cuts were leading towards something far worse. The final straw came on a Sunday afternoon that was supposed to be a celebration. Marcus had just secured a major contract after years of relentless work. It wasn't overnight success. It was the result of early mornings, missed weekends, calculated risks, and countless moments when everyone else doubted him. My parents hosted a family dinner a week later. For a brief moment, I thought things might change. Instead, my father raised his glass and congratulated my brother for receiving a promotion. Then he spent 20 minutes discussing my cousin's new house. Marcus sat quietly beside me. No one mentioned his achievement, not one person. I watched him smile politely while serving himself another spoonful of food, pretending not to notice what everyone at the table was deliberately ignoring. Something shifted inside me then. Not anger, clarity. I realized I had spent years waiting for people to become who they had repeatedly shown me they were not. The problem wasn't that they misunderstood Marcus. The problem was that they understood him perfectly and still refused to respect him. That night after we got home, I stood on our apartment balcony watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Marcus joined me without saying a word. "We don't need their approval," I finally said. He nodded once, and for the first time, I stopped trying to earn a seat at a table that never intended to save one for us. After that night, Marcus and I made a decision that changed everything. We stopped spending energy trying to prove ourselves. Instead, we invested every ounce of it into building our future. Marcus expanded his company one carefully calculated step at a time. He studied markets, negotiated contracts, and surrounded himself with people who valued results instead of appearances. Every partnership was researched. Every risk was measured. My background was in finance, and I began helping manage the growing business. I reviewed agreements, monitored investments, and created systems that protected what we were building. Success wasn't luck. It was structure, discipline, and patience repeated over thousands of ordinary days. What struck me most was how small the room suddenly felt. Not because of the mansion, but because 10 years of choices were standing there with us. Reputations aren't destroyed in a single moment. They're shaped by countless decisions that seem insignificant at the time. My family wasn't suffering because they had lost money. They were suffering because they had realized success couldn't erase the memory of how they treated people. And that's why this story matters. Most people will never own a mansion. Most people will never build a multi-million-dollar company. But everyone will eventually face the consequences of how they value or devalue others when there is nothing to gain from being kind. In the end, we did help them, not because they deserved it, not because money erased the past, and certainly not because we had forgotten. We helped because Marcus and I refused to let their choices determine the kind of people we became. The assistance came with clear boundaries, professional agreements, and realistic expectations. No emotional bargains, no attempts to rewrite history. Just a fair opportunity for them to rebuild what they had lost. Some relationships improved slowly afterward. Others never fully recovered. The truth is that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. I learned that lesson late, but I learned it well. As for Marcus and me, we returned to our lives with a sense of peace that success alone could never provide. The mansion, the company, the wealth, those were only symbols. The real victory was discovering that our worth had never depended on the approval of people who refused to see it. Months later, I stood on the balcony overlooking the estate as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon. Marcus slipped his hand into mine. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. 10 years earlier, they had closed a door on us. What they never understood was that while they were guarding that door, we were busy building an entirely different world. And sometimes the most powerful revenge is living so well that the people who doubted you become strangers to your success.